All right. So, Hamlet and the Man Who Made Him Famous. So we're going to talk a little bit about Shakespeare and what do you need to know about Hamlet. Okay, so there's probably some things you already know about Shakespeare. If you've studied anything Shakespeare um, in high school or any of your other education, you probably know these things. He was born in Stratford upon Avon, so the town is named Stratford upon the Avon River. Okay, he was an English playwright. They were called bards. Shakespeare, because he's the most well known of them, he is called the Bard. Okay, so he kind of gets the like the Ohio State in his title. He wrote a ton of stuff. Um, Almost all of it is in iambic pentameter, so there's your meter. He wrote sonnets, he wrote tragedies, he wrote comedies, he wrote histories, all kinds of things. He owned slash ran the Globe Theatre in London, and he was part of the King's Men acting company. So lots of things he did. He was a prolific writer. Some people say he didn't have a lot of education, and maybe he's actually somebody else. There's a lot of mystery about him. So here's some things you may not know. We don't actually know when he was born. Have no idea. His baptism was on April 26, 1564, but his birthday is traditionally celebrated on the 23rd. I don't exactly know why that we do that, but that's what we do. Okay, so April 23rd. He went to grammar school, but he only went till he was 13. So he would not have technically finished high school even. And then he just kind of disappears until the 1850s. Or sorry, till the 1580s. So, we go almost 10 years without a whole lot of information about what's happening to him. Okay. The only reason that we know what happens to him in the 1580s is because he gets married, and marriages and births and deaths, those are recorded in the town records, and so that's the only reason we have any of this. So in November, he marries a woman named Anne Hathaway. She was much older than him and pregnant with his child. She moved in with Shakespeare and Shakespeare's father, John. They had a daughter, Susanna, and then they had twins, Hamlet and Judith. I have no idea if that's where he gets the name Hamlet, but, that was his kids' names. In 1596, Hamlet died, and Anne was heartbroken. By this time, she was alone because she wanted to stay in Stratford. It was a smaller town. She took care of William's father. That's where her friends were. But if Shakespeare was going to be a playwright, he really had to be in London. He had to be in the city because that's where the theater was and that's where the scene was. And so that's where he needed to be. She tried living in London and she hated it. He bought a house in London for her to move there, and it didn't go well. So by 1592, he is very well known. He was famous even in his own time. In 1593, the theaters close. The Puritans managed to get the theater closed, and also there's this little thing called the plague that happened. So he took that time to find a patron to help pay for his writing, and he spent a lot of time writing. The Earl of Southampton took him on, and so then in April of 1593, we get the play Venus and Adonis. Okay, it was wildly successful, and Elizabeth technically becomes one of his patrons. And so he performs in front of the Queen often. She loved coming to see his plays. This is when Romeo and Juliet happens, and that was a huge success. And so he is very, very famous. In 1596, then, shortly after all of this success, Hamlet dies. There is no record of William coming back to see his family, to be there for the funeral. We don't have a lot of information that shows that he spent much time with his family at all. Because he's so successful, shortly afterwards he buys the second largest house in London in 1597 because he, I guess, has a change of heart and decides that he wants his family to live in London. right? He gets very famous, but honestly, his wife hated it. She hated the fame and all the people and things like that. And so she actually left and moved back to Stratford. And, you know, he would come and visit, but they spent most of their later years apart. He died in 1616, possibly from typhus, though we don't really know. He is buried in Holy Trinity Church in Stratford. So you will not find Shakespeare in London. A lot of people think that's where he would be, but he isn't. He is buried in his hometown. This is what it says on his tomb. Good friend, for Jesus' sake, forbear to dig the dust and close it here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moved my bones. There was a great fear that people would try to dig up Shakespeare's body and sell off his bones as memorabilia, essentially, which is kind of creepy. But anyway, that's a little bit about his personal life. We don't know a whole lot. Most of it's just speculation. Okay, so here's what you need to know about the play specifically. Hamlet is a tragic hero. Okay, he's a teenage boy with a tough decision to make, although people argue about how old Hamlet actually is. You know, some scholars say he might have been in his 20s. I've even seen some who say he's in his 30s. And so, you know, just know he's not a grown adult. Okay. He's got a tough decision to make. So he is our hero. The protagonist of so what is a tragic hero? Well, the protagonist of a tragedy who evokes pity and fear from the audience. We have to see that he has a change in fortune from very good to very bad. We call that peripeteia. Okay, so this sudden reversal of good to bad. Okay, usually because they make a decision. So tragic heroes bring that on themselves because of decisions they make. We can argue, and we will, is that true for Hamlet? Okay. There has to be some kind of inner quality, and you'll see this in Hamlet, that drives the character to make or not make decisions that push the plot along. So the plot happens because our main character makes decisions, and at least one of them has to be a bad decision. Okay, and then that's how we get that sudden reversal of fortune, and things just go and fall, you know, explode. However, we have to like him. Okay, if he had it coming to him, he's not a tragic hero. He's just an antagonist then. Okay, so he cannot deserve his fate. We don't want that to happen to our hero. Okay, but because of certain personality traits, maybe impulsiveness, pride, hubris, right, which is intense personal pride, you know, this is what leads to the tragic end. All right. Usually the character has to make a really tough decision, a tough moral decision, that we agree is the decision we probably would have made too, but it's what leads to the very bloody end. Okay. So something about his personality causes him to make decisions, which then leads to this reversal of fortune, which then leads to really tough decisions that they have to make, and that seem fair to make, but nonetheless, you know, the plot thickens and it kind of all falls apart. So we'll talk about parts of that and whether we see all of that in Hamlet. Some play terms to know. An aside is when a character speaks to him or herself, or turns and sort of on the side whispers to the audience. Okay, a monologue is a lengthy speech given by one character to another character. That's different than a soliloquy. A soliloquy is a lengthy speech where the character is the only one on stage. So the character is having, this is how we get that internal internal dialogue thing happening. Because how do you do that in a play? Well, the answer is you make them stand on stage by themselves. You'll see monologues in here where Hamlet speaks long stretches, contemplating things, but there are other characters out there with him, and then sometimes he's by himself. A conceit is an extended metaphor that has sort of a weird comparison that the character is making, and you will see those. Oxymoron is two opposite terms combined. My favorite one is jumbo shrimp. So be on the lookout for those because Shakespeare loves oxymorons. Staging is nonverbal cues that the writer gives to sort of direct the play. And so these are outside of the dialogue. They usually happen before and after scenes. So, Hamlet exits stage right would be staging. One thing that a play has to have, this is what Aristotle says, is unity. So of time, place, and action is what he says. So a play has to take place within 24 hours in the same location and be either tragedy or comedy. Now, I will say that Hamlet doesn't necessarily fit this, and most plays today don't. But the original plays would have, and the idea of unity, of simplicity, of brevity still holds true. Okay, and typically the point of view of a play is third dramatic because we don't have a narrator. The characters themselves kind of give us the action, but they all speak in I, right? We follow all of them. So we call this third person dramatic. So just know that that's the point of view you'll see. All right, some key ideas from Hamlet. Remember, this is a tragedy, so be looking for those elements, including tragic hero, tragic flaw, and then look for those elements of drama. We'll discuss those in the discussion boards. Also look for these key themes: decay and corruption, revenge, and that goes for many characters. A big one we're going to talk about is appearance versus reality. This kind of goes back to dramatic irony. There will be a lot of times when the reader, the audience, that's us, knows something that a character doesn't know, and so we'll also see lots of verbal irony. So it appears characters are saying one thing, but we know they mean something different. We're also going to talk about sanity, sanity versus insanity. We're going to talk about that with Hamlet and with others. So, the mental state of our characters, are they reliable? Can we trust them to tell us the truth? That's a good question. And then, of course, the big one for this particular play is Hamlet really, at the end of the day, is trying to understand what life is about. He's searching for truth, for meaning, for his purpose in life. He feels lost. He feels very unsure about anything, because his life has completely been upended and he's struggling to deal with it. So I think we can all relate to that. I think we've all had those moments where we don't know where we're going or what we're trying to do. And so I hope you appreciate that about Hamlet, is that he's struggling through that. And it makes him very real, even though he's a fictional character. So he's, at the end of the day, trying to figure out what is the right thing to do, which it's true for most tragic heroes. So just a little bit about, Hamlet in general. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, you have quite a bit to do this week, and I will see you in the discussion boards. All right, talk to you later.